Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Thursday, September 15th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight.
Today is a win, and I mean this sincerely, a win for America.
Railway unions have called off a nationwide strike. The tentative deal prevents what could have been a crippling shutdown. White House economist Bernstein is back to discuss the agreement and what happens now. Groups of migrants have ended up in Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. 2 Republican governors sent them there as a political statement. What will happen to these migrants, and what does this mean for the immigration debate? Thousands of people could end up waiting up to 30 hours to bid farewell to Queen Elizabeth II. We'll have the latest from London. Also, how much does your phone share your exact location? You might want to think about it after the murder of a popular rapper. We'll explain. And what would it take to make conservative Christianity the law of the land? A small town in Idaho might have some answers. We'll preview tonight's season premiere of Meet the Press Reports. America relies on railways, perhaps more than we realize. We might have found out the hard way. But a national rail strike is off thanks to a tentative union deal. President Biden says major freight operators and 2 large unions have a pending agreement. It took 20 hours of negotiations to reach. Last night, around 9 Eastern, the president urged the negotiators to find a way forward. Today, he praised the deal.
This agreement is validation what I've always believed. Unions and management can work together for the benefit of everyone.
The agreement includes yearly raises, bonuses, and more flexible medical leave. Union members still need to vote on it before it can take effect. A joint statement from the 2 unions applauded the tentative deal. Quote, "We listened when our members told us that a final agreement would require improvements to their quality of life as well as economic gains," unquote. But the possibility of a strike still forced some rail lines to cancel trips. News of an agreement prompted Amtrak to start restoring today's cancellations along these routes. CNBC senior White House correspondent Kayla Tausche joins us now with the latest from Washington. Kayla, what did it take to seal this deal last night?
Well, there was 20 hours of negotiations, Joshua, between the railroads, the unions, and the Biden administration, and they really were drilling it down into specific language about the time off that workers would get. That was the crux of this deal. That is what has dragged this along for several months. Just in August, an independent emergency board appointed by President Biden laid out other terms of the deal, a 24% raise over 5 years, annual bonuses, and health care costs that would be capped, but didn't deal with this critical issue of quality of life and the time off that they would get. That's what this deal is about, and it finally came together in the wee hours of the morning.
There are a lot of different kinds of rail lines and rail companies that are affected by this deal and what could have been a strike, but how are some of them reacting to the tentative agreement?
I think you can say that there is a general sigh of relief that they will wake up tomorrow and they will be operating. The freight trains will be running across this country and they will not have to go through the headache of contingency planning and what would have been. But there is still some real work to do. Just today on CNBC, the incoming CEO of one of the major railroads, CSX, said that he's going to be canvassing employees to talk about what needs to change. Here's what he said.
How do we use this operating model that we have that delivers very strong results to better serve our customers and, frankly, better serve our employees and let them be part of the discussion around how do we improve the business going forward?
That was the incoming CEO of CSX, one of the major railroad companies, talking about what's called precision railroading. That is this efficiency plan where basically they only run the trains they need, longer trains, shorter stops, and they have employees on standby all the time. There's a lot of unpredictability, but they're hoping to change that.
And Kayla, what about the unions? What are they saying about this deal? Do they feel like they got most of what they wanted, all of what they wanted? Are they kind of grudgingly signing on the dotted line? How do they feel about this?
Well, there's no signature just yet. I think it's safe to say they're cautiously optimistic, but there are some unions that aren't totally sold yet. One of the 12 unions has a public Facebook page, and you saw a lot of workers commenting there saying, hey, we wanted paid leave, not unpaid sick leave. What, we only get one additional paid off? Are we supposed to get sick only 1 day per year? So there's some real skepticism about the deal. But earlier today, I also spoke with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, and he said it's now up to union leadership to sell their rank and file members, and he says that's going to be happening over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
And Kayla, we talked about this a bit last night. It seems like the worst has been averted, but just remind us of what could have happened. If they had not reached this deal and we had been on a track for strikes and disruptions, this could have disrupted way more than just freight or way more than just Amtrak. This could have been felt in many parts of the U.S. economy, right?
Yeah, we're not talking just about Amazon packages not getting to your doorstep here, Joshua. I mean, there were real questions that drinking water would not be able to be treated, that key components going into gasoline would not arrive at their end destinations, and there would be large supplies of gasoline that would be kept off the market and driving those costs up. And then you talk about certain other materials that go into grains and fertilizers. Livestock across the country would not have had food to eat. It would have been incredibly dire, but as you say, that situation has been avoided.
Thank you, Kayla. That's CNBC senior White House correspondent Kayla Tausche starting us off from Washington.
Thanks.
Let's continue now with Jared Bernstein, a member of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Mr. Bernstein, welcome back. Good to see you tonight.
Great to be with you again, Joshua.
Let me just ask you about the nature of the deal and the administration's involvement in it. Let me play you also a clip of something that the Labor Secretary Marty Walsh said in terms of what this deal means for the unions that now have to vote on it. Watch.
This is a good negotiation for the respect of the workers, and I think that that's really important. And the leadership of the union did a really good job understanding the challenges. And also, this contract's been up for 2 years now, so you know there's been some hard feelings out there. So this is a good result.
So after 2 years of hard feelings, what do you think it was that finally allowed a deal to get done now?
Well, first of all, I think we all have to give our props to Secretary Walsh. I'd also put President Biden in that mix for choosing a labor secretary, former mayor of a city, but also a former union leader, because this president is so understanding of the important role that unions need to play in this economy if workers are going to get their fair share of the economy's growth. He made sure that his labor secretary was well positioned to engage in precisely this type of negotiation. 20 hours coming down to the last minute. As people with experience in this field know, that's actually not that unusual to come down to the last minute, but the stakes here were just so high, and you had a great conversation with Kayla about that a second ago. So when the president says this is a big win for the American people, I mean, Joshua, you and I could be having a very, very different and much less promising conversation tonight than the one we're having around this tentative deal. The president is right on point. Big win for the people, big win for the workers, and a win for the companies as well. Really important, these measures, when it comes to retaining workers for this important part of the workforce.
Do you know if, and this may be something that you're not aware of, but do you know what the administration strategy is going forward? I mean, does the administration, the labor secretary, continue to work with unions to promote them ratifying the deal, or is the administration's job kind of done at this point?
Well, obviously, we're going to pay a lot of attention to the ratification process, but, you know, the unions, and this union is just one example of many, they're one of the most democratic institutions we have in this country. And what they're going to do over the next several weeks, I think you played Marty saying 4 to 6 weeks, what they're going to do over the next several weeks is really unpack a decision, a tentative negotiation that has many layers to it. I mean, obviously, we're talking about pay, but we're also talking about working conditions. You've mentioned some of the issues around attendance, around sick leave. These are critical to these workers trying to balance work and family. The companies for many years were really drilling down on efficiencies. And look, that has its pluses, of course, when it comes to bottom line and productivity, but not if it's coming at the expense of the workforce. More pragmatically, at this point, it's a matter of the unions and the leadership unpacking this tentative deal for their members, talking to them about it, explaining about it them, and then counting the votes.
I feel like, I know I got to let you go in a second, but I feel like even if this deal gets ratified, there's still this longer-term issue with railways in America. And we really depend on railways, I think, more than we often think about, as Kayla kind of enumerated. There was some reporting from the New York Times about working conditions involving workers remaining on call for days and weeks at a time, strict attendance policies that could lead to disciplinary action. And then, of course, there's just the amount that we rely on rail for basically every corner of the economy, transporting food and natural gas and raw materials and all kinds of other things. Where does the administration see the future solutions for what rail does today? Do we continue to rely on rail? Do we rely on some different things, kind of shift the way we move things around and move people around? Like, where do we go from here?
I don't think there's any coherent future that doesn't involve a robust, healthy rail system. And I think what we're seeing here is really a microcosm of what the Biden administration is about in this space. We happen to have an infrastructure bill that very much plugs in that kind of thinking for revitalizing rail systems in this country, the kind of infrastructure that's been ignored and disinvested in for years, even decades on end. So part one is a bipartisan deal, a president who's been able to negotiate a bipartisan deal to invest in that infrastructure, which is absolutely a part of our future. But part two, or I should say an equal part one, is the union part, which also has been categorically ignored by prior administrations. It's not just about rail and efficiency and fast motors and fast engines and revitalized track. It's about working people. And at the bottom line is making sure that these rail workers who served us so tirelessly through the pandemic have the kinds of working conditions, the kinds of attendance policies and that you mentioned a second ago that keep them on the job, that keep them satisfied, productive workers. And I think this combination of investments in the nation's infrastructure and paying real attention to the importance of unions in that equation, never leaving out the workers, I think that's Bidenomics 101.
It is indeed an essential workforce, and we'll see how the rank-and-file members react to these tentative deals. White House Economic Advisor Jared Bernstein, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua.
2 plane loads of migrants are in Massachusetts tonight, settling in on the Tony enclave of Martha's Vineyard. Florida's governor sent them there without notice, and he's standing by that decision. According to the Vineyard Gazette, about 50 migrants arrived today, mostly hailing from Venezuela. Local aid groups are sheltering them while people figure out a longer-term plan. Massachusetts has never formally declared itself a sanctuary state for undocumented migrants. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said as much in defending his decision.
You have folks that are inclined to think Florida is a good place. Our message to them is we are not a sanctuary state, and it's better to be able to go to a sanctuary jurisdiction. And yes, we will help facilitate that transport for you to be able to go to greener pastures.
Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott sent 2 busloads of migrants to the Vice President's official residence in Washington at the U.S. Naval Observatory. A tweet from his official account reads, quote, VP Harris claims our border is secure and denies the crisis. We're sending migrants to her backyard to call on the Biden administration to do its job and secure the border, unquote. NBC's Gary Grumbach joins us now with more. Gary, what is the latest from Martha's Vineyard and the mood among the volunteers and the migrants themselves tonight?
Yeah, Joshua, I think it's fair to say nobody, not the migrants, not local officials, and certainly not the residents, expected 50 migrants to land in Martha's Vineyard the week after Labor Day, courtesy of, as you mentioned, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, this is a small town of about 17,000 full-time residents, and it sort of reminds me of that show Come From Away, where a town takes in people they were not expecting and really takes care of their every need. It's been really remarkable to watch. The church in Edgartown provided breakfast for the migrants this morning. The local school district provided lunch, and restaurants across the island are providing dinner tonight, and community members are really stepping up every way. They're really out of the good of their own hearts here. Here's what one volunteer on the island had to say.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world than right here with all these people, serving these people and serving with the people that I'm with. It's a beautiful thing. And these refugees, they're some of the kindest people. You know, they're so grateful, and they don't want a handout. Like, every single one of the gentlemen has come up and said, when can I start working?
And Joshua, just think of the journey that these migrants have been on. One migrant said he had walked through 10 countries just to get to Texas, and then spent a few days in Texas before being flown to an island they've never been to before, and frankly, don't know what to do or where to go next.
Gary, we should be clear. Even though Governor DeSantis said Florida is not a sanctuary state, speaking as a native Floridian, there are tremendous enclaves where a number of migrants of various immigration statuses end up in Central and South Florida as they make their way. So Florida has its own issues as it relates to dealing with immigration and these kind of gray markets that support undocumented immigrants. No judgment, just facts there. So the politics of this going forward kind of fascinate me. I wonder what the next move is, particularly what this means for the larger debate, and then just what happens to these folks.
Well, for the migrants themselves, they need to get these migrants onto the mainland where the state has more easily accessible resources. That's really the first step, because Governor Charlie Baker, who's a Republican, I might add, has said they're working on setting up a more long-term shelter with humanitarian services at Joint Base Cape Cod to help get these migrants to their final destinations, which was very likely never going to be Martha's Vineyard. Joshua?
All right. Thank you, Gary. That's NBC's Gary Grumbach with the latest on this migrant crisis, the situation from our Washington bureau. Let's get to some late-breaking news tonight related to the documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago. We've learned this evening that a federal judge named a special master to review those documents. We've been talking about the debate over the files that were found at former President Trump's home. The federal judge also denied the Justice Department in its bid for more access to these classified documents, about 100 that it collected on the property. Judge Eileen Cannon wrote in her ruling tonight, quote, "The court does not find it appropriate to accept the government's conclusions on these important and disputed issues without further review by a neutral third party in an expedited and orderly fashion," unquote. That neutral third party is the special master. And tonight we know who that will be. It will be former federal Judge Raymond Dearie of New York. That is the one candidate that both former President Trump's legal team and the Department of Justice's legal team could agree on. Judge Dearie will sort through the more than 11,000 documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago. We've been discussing this legal debate with NBC legal analyst Danny Savalos for some time, and he joins us now. And Danny, now that we have a name for who the special master is and a response to the DOJ's request for continued access to the documents in the meantime, what do you make of it?
Not a surprise on Judge Dearie. He really was exceptionally qualified among other qualified judges, and even DOJ conceded, which I think was a good move. They essentially said, all right, you know, it may be Trump's choice, but we're okay with Judge Dearie because he had experience on the FISA court, which means he's going to have clearance. He has experience with classified documents, and he's the chief judge, Eastern District, former chief judge, Eastern District of New York, that's over across the river here in Brooklyn. And he was eminently qualified. Two of the other judges were as well. Can't really speak for the private attorney that was nominated. Certainly seemed to have some credentials. But I think DOJ made the right move here without fighting it too much. They still get somebody with plenty of experience in the area. And DOJ comes off looking pretty good, saying, all right, we're not going to fight it. This is a good judge. In terms of the other part of it, DOJ really wanted to prevent Judge Dearie from reviewing certain materials, and Judge Cannon shot that down. I expect DOJ will appeal that decision.
Can I ask you about one part of the discussion to that piece of these rulings. And I'm flipping through this quickly, I think, with a lot of other people. But in terms of pushing back on this stay to try to get access at the documents, the judge describes, a number of premises that would have to be accepted for the court to do that. Quote, the first premise is that all of the approximately 100 documents isolated by the government are classified government records, and that plaintiff, the former president, therefore could not possibly have a possessory interest in any of them. What does that mean? That almost sounds like the judge is questioning whether the DOJ saying, hey, these are classified documents we found are indeed classified documents. But am I reading too much into that?
No, I don't think you are. I mean, I think the overall theme of Judge Cannon's opinion, and look, she's going to be criticized for this, and I understand why, but if I'm trying to look behind the robes and see what her thinking is, it's the ultra careful approach. It may not be popular, but in her mind, it appears that giving everything to a special master and not on the front end trying to decide, well, this is a category of classified documents. This is a category, maybe that's just Time magazines. Instead of her making that decision, she's foisting it all onto the special master. Now, DOJ doesn't want that. DOJ would rather make distinctions between different kinds of documents and prevent the special master from ever seeing those, because DOJ is concerned about third parties, even Judge Deary, but any third party seeing documents that they consider may be classified. But if I'm playing guess what Judge Cannon's thinking is, in her mind, as she gets all the documents to the same special master, they'll all be reviewed, and there will be a neutral answer as to all the documents all at once. And I get DOJ's argument, and it's a strong one. But if I'm a judge, I've always thought if I'm a judge, I will take the path of least resistance, the most conservative approach, and I mean little c, and I'll be into self-preservation, and I'll say, hey, special master, this is your problem now.
So we've got a judge who's got extensive federal experience. You mentioned that he was involved in the FISA court, which involves cases under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which all have to be reviewed by a special judge. But on the other hand, and you and I talked about this a few weeks ago as well, I don't remember exactly when, it's all blurring together, but we have talked about this, about how this is not a normal special master situation. This isn't like plain old attorney-client privilege that like I would have if I was dealing with a lawyer. This is something quite unprecedented. So how does this factor into the unprecedented nature of all of this, especially since DOJ is like, time's a wasted on our investigation. We can't allow these documents to just kind of gather moss. How does all of that factor into this?
Right. The reason this is unprecedented is that ordinarily, when special masters are appointed in these situations, it normally, most of the time, first of all, it's rare, but most of the time it's when they search an attorney's office. And the reason for that is an attorney's office is unique in that not only do you have attorney-client privilege documents there, you have attorney-client privilege documents from people that have nothing at all to do with the investigation. They're just clients. Maybe they have a DUI, maybe they have some other legal issue, but they're not involved in this at all. So when you execute a search warrant, you might go through all those privileged documents. This is quite different. This is not an attorney's office, and the privilege isn't necessarily attorney-client privilege. It's an entirely different privilege, executive privilege, which serves the same idea behind privilege. We want people to disclose things to certain people in certain situations without fear of it getting disclosed to the public. And that's really what executive privilege is all about, so that the executive can deliberate with his higher ups safely without worrying about it getting out to the public. But the bottom line is, this really hasn't been done before. So what the judge and all the parties have had to do is sort of take this case law that applies to a factually different situation and try and square peg, round hole it into this situation. And no matter what, I mean, each side has solid arguments, but no matter what, it's really a case of first impression in many ways.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos, so many twists and turns and such a huge precedent that this will set no matter which way it goes. Danny, appreciate you talking this through with us tonight. Thank you very much. Still to come, the latest from London. Thousands of people are waiting to say goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. The line to Westminster is 5 miles long.
It is a mission, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you know, you just know that it's going to be a magical moment in there.
Thousands of people remain in line for a chance to say goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. Former British Prime Minister Theresa May and her husband were in the queue as well. Now, as a member of Parliament, Ms. May is technically allowed to skip the line, though that tradition has been condemned by many. Meanwhile, King Charles III is said to be spending a private day of reflection at his residence in the southwest of England. The Queen Consort was reportedly not with him. Prince William and Kate went to Sandringham Estate to visit with mourners who gathered to share condolences there. Reportedly, the prince met a woman who said she was close to tears, to which he responded, "Don't cry now, you'll start me." MSNBC anchor Lindsay Reiser is in London with more. Lindsay, how are folks holding up in line as they make their way toward Westminster?
It's a chilly early morning here, Joshua, about 1:30 in the morning local time. I can tell you the line is 9 hours and 5 miles long, but people are happy to do it. They say they really want to be a part of this moment in history. I actually spoke to 2 women who were already camping out by Westminster Abbey, where Her Majesty's state funeral will be held on Monday. They had blankets and sleeping bags. They were in it for the long haul. Let's listen to what they told me.
There's been a lot going on, and there are a lot of things that we could have come for, the procession yesterday, but this is a chance to say goodbye, farewell, and thank you. When I was watching on the television yesterday, there's something about sitting here in my chair. I can see Westminster Hall, where she's lying in state, right from where I'm sitting in my chair. I know that on Monday, her coffin's going to come past me, and it's going to be in Westminster Abbey, and then I'll know it's a real goodbye.
Very emotional for so many. She was actually waiting in line with a woman she had met at the Platinum Jubilee. They had tents there on the Mall, and obviously she's full of emotion, but they're kind of making an event out of it, Joshua.
Lindsay, one question that comes up a lot, just in my conversation with people, as we take this live look inside Westminster Hall, where the crowds are still filing by, what is there along the line? Is there food? Are there toilets? Is anyone selling bottles of water? Like, how are people just enduring being in line for that long?
I mean, the community is really coming together. There are spots along the queue where people can get something to eat. They can get something to drink. There are also bathrooms, portaloos, as they're called. There's one up by Lambeth Bridge where people will cross the River Thames to get over into Westminster Hall. And so they are set up for this, and they're also staggering the line. So behind me, the line is filing through. It's not a constant steady stream. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lull, but it certainly is moving, Joshua.
And briefly, Lindsay, before I let you go, I believe that RSVPs for Monday's funeral were due today. It will be a bank holiday in the U.S. Do we have a better sense of which world leaders and dignitaries will be there?
So we know that about 2,000 people are going to attend the state funeral, including 500 dignitaries from around the world. Of course, President Biden will be there, the First Lady, prime ministers of Canada, New Zealand, the president of France. And so there will be world leaders not only at the state funeral, but King Charles will also hold a reception at Buckingham Palace on Sunday ahead of it. And you mentioned the bank holiday. There are so many things that are going to be closed down on Monday. Cinemas, mostly, for the most part, will be closed. Some of them are going to be streaming the funeral for free for people. A lot of stores and markets are closed, and also grocery stores, for example, are actually lowering the volume of the checkout beeps in this period of mourning. So and of course, that doesn't even include all of the people who are expected to come out again and fill the streets of London to watch some of the processions, Joshua.
And by the way, I think I said U.S. bank holiday. Of course, a U.K. bank holiday, but an event that will be watched very closely in the U.S. as well. Thank you, Lindsay. That's MSNBC anchor Lindsay Reiser joining us with the latest from London. We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including a near-total ban on abortions in Indiana, new sanctions against Russia for the devastation in Ukraine, and progress toward ending the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. Tonight's headlines begin in Indiana. A new state law is in effect banning abortion at all stages of pregnancy. It does leave room for specific exceptions. Indiana still allows abortions on account of rape or incest before the 10th week of pregnancy to protect the mother's life and physical health, or if the fetus is diagnosed with a lethal condition. The new law also strips all of Indiana's abortion clinics of their licenses. Now, only hospitals and outpatient centers may perform the procedure. The ACLU and Planned Parenthood are suing over the law. A hearing is set for this Monday. Joining us now is Professor Jennifer Drobak of the Indiana University School of Law. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Tell us more about this law and what the immediate impacts will be. This basically shuts abortion down under all but the most dire of circumstances. Have I left anything out?
No, you haven't. This basically rules out about 98% of the abortions that have been performed historically in Indiana. And so it basically leaves women without options because the exceptions are so narrow and it's so difficult to determine within the time frame that Indiana set whether or not someone's pregnant. One of the things that you left out, which is really important, is that this law defines human life from the moment of fertilization, and it bans all abortion post that moment. So unless you fit into one of the very narrow circumstances. So there is some question also as to whether or not it bans some forms of contraception. Also, Indiana happens to have one of the lower ages of consent. So that means that some teenagers who consent to sex with, if it's Romeo and Juliet, they would be scooped into this ban. There would be no allegation of rape because they were consenting teenagers. And then they would be forced to have children, which I would argue hits right up against the Indiana child abuse and neglect statutes because the state is banning access to abortion and is also requiring children to have children. So we also could talk about the religious implications of all of this. There are just a mess of problems implicated by this law.
Well, I wonder what has been going on ahead of the effective date of this law today. Governor Gavin Newsom of California has been targeting 7 states, including Indiana, with billboards, kind of noting that abortion services are protected in California. He tagged Indiana's Governor Eric Holcomb in one tweet referring to the billboards that will be seen. They were also put up in Texas, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Ohio. And we remember that case of the 10-year-old girl from Ohio who traveled to Indiana to have abortion services after she was raped. So what's been going on in the state ahead of today in anticipation of this law taking effect?
Certainly, the healthcare providers have been gearing up for the effort to deal with this. But there's not a whole lot that can be done because we have a super majority Republican legislature, which is quite determined. We also have an Attorney General, Todd Rokita, who, as you know, and your viewers know, even though the doctor who took care of that 10-year-old did it by the book, our Attorney General tried to prosecute and harassed her. So the ACLU and Planned Parenthood have been helping out. The 2 suits filed, but lobbying the legislature has not been effective. So it's going to be taken to the courts. The governor is set on this law. And so I welcome, and many people welcome, the efforts of other states, the lessons of other states. Many people in Indiana wanted a referendum like was had in Kansas because it is clear, I think, to most people that Hoosiers do not want this law. And so if they could vote on it, they would vote as Kansans did. But that's not even an option for us because it's only the legislature that can give us the referendum.
Indiana University Law Professor Jennifer Drobak, I appreciate you being on with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Residents of Jackson, Mississippi can finally stop boiling their water. It's been nearly 7 weeks since a catastrophic failure at the local treatment plant. Today, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves announced that Jackson's boil water advisory has finally been lifted. He also warned residents to stay alert for more problems.
This system is still imperfect, and we are going to address issues throughout the duration of the state's response. It is possible, although I pray not inevitable, that there will be further interruptions. We cannot perfectly predict what may go wrong with such a broken system in the future.
Governor Reeves declared a state of emergency in August after devastating floods knocked out Jackson's main water facility. Water pressure has returned, but it was not considered safe to drink until now. Russia is under even more sanctions from the U.S. over its war in Ukraine. The penalties announced today target dozens of officials. Some have allegedly helped Russia destabilize Ukraine. Others are Russian companies accused of human rights abuses. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Russian missiles continue to damage critical infrastructure. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has the latest. Hey, Aaron.
Hey there. The hometown of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has come under serious bombardment in the last 48 hours. The latest Russian missile striking an industrial site in the city, leading to what Ukrainian officials are saying is serious damage that they're still assessing. That attack on the heels of at least 8 cruise missiles striking a critical dam in the region, causing flooding, leading to dozens of homes being underwater and dozens more evacuated, although officials say that those floodwaters have started to recede, that they have been able to make repairs to the dam, but they're bracing for the possibility of more missile strikes. President Zelensky railing against Russia for those strikes, saying it's yet another example of an attack on civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, an ominous warning today from spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, saying the United States would be crossing a, quote, red line if it provided long-range missiles to Ukraine, saying that that would carry with it serious consequences, though we have heard from John Kirby, the coordinator for the National Security Council, say that the United States is planning to announce yet another military aid package for Ukraine in the coming days, although the details of that package have yet to be announced. Back to you.
That was NBC's Aaron McLaughlin reporting from Ukraine. Up next, an Instagram post might have gotten a rapper killed, not for what he said, but for where he was. We'll dig into the death of PNB Rock and what you should know about your phone's location data. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. How much of your daily life should you share on social media? The answer might have a lot to do with sharing where you are as it is with sharing what you're doing. And location data might be a factor in a high-profile homicide. On Monday, the rapper PNB Rock was shot dead in Los Angeles. He was dining with his girlfriend at the time. LAPD says he was targeted for his jewelry. But the attack happened soon after the rapper's girlfriend tagged their location on Instagram. Now, officers are investigating whether that location data led to the crime. Now, this does not mean you should turn off every bit of location sharing on your phone. If you do that, some of your apps won't work. But how much does your phone share where you are? And what can we do to protect our privacy? Joining us now is Georgia Tech professor Peter Swire. He's a former privacy official at the White House under Presidents Clinton and Obama. Professor Swire, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Help me think through this case. It occurs to me that if I posted on Instagram, hey, at work at 30 Rock doing the show tonight, it doesn't take a genius to know when my show is on and where exactly Rockefeller Center is. So there's location info and then there's location data. How should we be looking at this in terms of all of this place-based information and our safety? I don't want to put myself at unnecessary risk, but I also don't want to walk through life paranoid either.
Right. Well, I think the first thing is, when do you want somebody to know where you are? So if it's your family or if it's find your phone for a teenager, there's good reasons to have location data. On the other hand, if you're posting publicly, and a majority of people have their default on social media set to public, if you're posting publicly and there's geolocation, then, for instance, burglars can figure out you're not at home. Then, for instance, you do hashtag spring break or vacation, they know your place is empty. So you need to be thinking about, why do I want people to have my location, and when do I want strangers to have my location?
Talk about what our phones do with location data. There's always, at least on an iPhone, there's that little arrow that you see in the corner that means that your phone is sending location data, that there are location services that are active. Talk about how our phones use these data. To an extent, I mean, our phones wouldn't work if cell towers could not know where we were to send us a signal, right?
That's what I tell my students. I say, we're the first generation in history to carry a tracking device with us pretty much all the time. So that's just a starting point, right? We carry tracking devices. We rarely are without our phone. But the phone company being able to send you a phone call is a lot different from burglars or robbers knowing where you are at that moment. You know, the story for PNB Rock is, according to what's in the press, is his girlfriend said, we're in this restaurant right now, and my guy is rich and famous. You know, that combination can bring people who want to be near celebrity, who want to be near jewelry. It can bring people out. And you're sort of saying, here's a target. I'm right here, right now.
You know, it's funny, when Kamala Harris was... Oh, go ahead, Professor, go ahead.
No, I don't know too much, but here's something I was thinking about. You know how people like to have a lot of followers? Well, that sounds good on social media, but if you had a lot of followers when you're walking down the street, that sounds more like stalkers. And so there's this way where our digital followers turn into potential stalkers. And so then you need to think through, when do I want them following? What do I want them to know about where I am at that moment?
Well, let's get into that. I know I got to let you go in a second, but even Kamala Harris, before she was vice president, when she was still the Attorney General of California, suggested that all Californians turn off those automatic location services in a number of apps. And at the time, I think there was some complaining that, like, why does this solitaire game on my iPhone need my location? It's just asking for all the data it can get. What would you recommend in terms of how people think through these location data, especially if they're using some apps, other than, like, say, Instagram, that may want the location data but not need the data for the app to work?
Look, our map apps need our location. We can't figure out where to drive unless they know where our car is. So that's a reason to have location data. For your social media, you have a choice. Are you going to geotag your pictures? Are you going to be sending around where you are? And those things aren't necessary to do most of what we do in life. So for those things, default towards private, default towards maybe your friends, but don't default towards public. And then when it comes to the tracking devices, iPhones have the ability to go granular location or sort of big picture location. The granular location pretty much limit that to maps or other things where you really, really need to know where a person is.
Yeah, and if you go through your settings on your phone, you can turn those on and off by app. I think a lot of parents are going to want to talk to their kids about the difference between when they're online, they're followers, when they're in person, they're stalkers. That is an important distinction, just to think that through. Georgia Tech professor Peter Swire, appreciate you talking this through with us. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
A growing movement is pushing to make America a Christian nation by law. That movement includes a small-town pastor in Idaho. He's part of tonight's episode of Meet the Press Reports. We'll have a preview before we go. The First Amendment includes the principle of separation of church and state. It also includes freedom of religion. Now a nationalist movement is pushing to erase that line and base our laws on Christianity overtly. Consider one church in Idaho pushing to make its town a theocracy, or, as it says on its website, all of Christ for all of life. The church says that, quote, under the grace of God, this means that our desire is to make Moscow, that's the name of the town, a Christian town, unquote. And they're not alone. A growing number of politicians say they are pushing for Christian doctrine to drive public policy. Joining us now is NBC Chief Environmental Affairs correspondent Ann Thompson. Her report on Christian nationalism leads off Season 5 of Meet the Press Reports. And tell us a bit about Moscow, Idaho, the people, the culture, where it's located. Just give us the lay of the land.
Joshua, it's really fascinating. Moscow is about an hour and a half southeast of Spokane, Washington. And it's a college town, which really sort of is kind of puzzling as to why Pastor Wilson would choose to fight his battle here. It is home to the University of Idaho, and just 8 miles away is another land-grant college, and that is Washington State University. So you've got an area where there's lots of intellectual ferment, lots of curiosity, and he really believes it's a very strategic place. If he can turn Moscow into a Christian town, then perhaps he can do the same to the rest of the United States.
He did explain to you a bit about what his rationale was for picking that town. Here's part of what he said. Watch.
Idaho is a very red state. Moscow was historically a very blue dot in this red state. And so consequently, the fact that we've done this has been disruptive in the minds of some, but the feasibility of evangelizing in Moscow had to do with the importance of the university and the size of the town.
You also asked him, Ann, what exactly a Christian town would look like, at least as he envisions it. Here's part of how he described that.
In your version of a Christian town, would there be a place for non-believers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Would there be a place for same-sex couples?
What, you mean legally?
Yes.
You mean like marriage? Mm-hmm. No marriage. But there'd be same-sex couples.
No marriage, even though it's the law of the land in the United States?
Just like Roe used to be, right? In my belief system, in our doctrinal stand, and what we believe the Bible teaches, homosexuality is not only a choice, but a sinful one.
And is the pastor and his effort in Moscow an outlier, or is there more of a pattern there that we should be paying attention to across the country?
Well, I think if you look at some recent statements from the more conservative Republicans, both in Congress and running for various state offices, who are calling for an end to the separation of church and state, this may be sort of the beginning of that movement. Now, Pastor Wilson himself says that he still believes in church and a separation in church and state. What he wants is the state to adopt the morals of the church, specifically the Christian church. But it's a very different Christian church than many people believe. He believes it's a very patriarchal church. It is a church that is led by men. Wives are submissive to their husbands. It is an anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, and anti-trans church vision of Christianity. And it is split the Christian community in Moscow. There are many other Christian churches in Moscow that look askance at what Pastor Wilson is doing.
I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, we should be clear, the Founding Fathers threw off a theocracy to create this democracy. That's why we didn't like King George III calling the shots anymore. So, I mean, even Abraham Lincoln, in his second inaugural, talked about both sides of the Civil War. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. So what do we expect in terms of where this goes? I wonder how much the pushback felt present to you compared to the support within the town for what the pastor is pushing for.
So I think one of the really interesting things, Joshua, is that when you go, you can read all about Moscow, and then you go and you see this, and the divide is not evident. It only becomes evident when you start talking to people, and that's because Moscow has a very much live and let live vibe. But I think the question is, can Pastor Wilson move his message beyond the people he's already attracted to his church? Christ Church has about 2,000 attendees. The city of Moscow has 25,000 people. There have been Christchurch members who have run for city council. They have been handily defeated. So there doesn't seem to be, while there is some spiritual power behind his message, it's not being transformed into political power, if you will. And Wilson, unlike some conservative evangelical pastors, is not preaching politics from his pulpit, at least politics that says vote for this candidate. He does not have an American flag on his stage. He does not tell you who to vote for from the pulpit. At least that's what he says. So he tries to keep those kind of very specific politics out of his church, but the culture wars, those issues are what drives his church.
I appreciate you mentioning the absence of an American flag. I think anyone who has been to a contemporary evangelical church, myself included, that is a very salient detail. Thank you, Ann. Looking forward to seeing this report. That's NBC's Ann Thompson. You can catch her report on Christian nationalism on Meet the Press Reports. That is tonight at 10:30 p.m. Eastern here on NBC News Now and streaming tomorrow on Peacock. Thank you for making time for us. I'd love to know your thoughts on Meet the Press Reports tonight or any of the topics that we discussed. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Leave us a voicemail at 888-575-2NBC or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Enjoy Meet the Press Reports, and we will see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.